So the world of One Punch Man just got a lot deeper and more exciting because in chapter 164, we got some big reveals. So in that chapter, we saw Garo hit Saitama with this huge attack that wound up like sending him through this mountain, and the shockwave like reverberated to the other side of the planet, and that wound up causing this landmass to emerge from the ocean. And on that landmass, there was like this monster dragon temple place. And this temple is like integral to the overall story of One Punch Man for more reasons than one. And I'm gonna go over them in this video, but first let's talk about the Sun Blade and the Moon Blade, aka Nichirin and Gachirin, because I'm thinking that this place, maybe not so much the temple, but just this area is where those legendary weapons come from. And those legendary weapons themselves give us more insight into the secret backstory of the One Punch Man world and where things are headed. So in chapter 146, we saw Vomited Fear Ugly straight up killing the rest of the Council of Swordsmasters aside from Atomic Samurai. And as Nichirin was dying after being split in half, he says to Atomic Samurai, Kamikaze, which is like his real name, "You are the last of the Holy Order of the Sword." And then he pulls this sword out of his prayer beads. Don't ask me how this works because it's not explained. It's just some kind of crazy dimensional magic or something. And Atomic Samurai says, "Is this the blade known as Nichirin?" Now that's the Viz translation for this weapon, and I think it means the sun or sunflower maybe, but the fan translation is the Sun Blade, and I like that name better for this thing, so I'm just gonna call it that. And also, if you're familiar with Demon Slayer, you know the swords that they use are called Nichirin blades, and it's kind of like the same thing here, although obviously they're not made the same way, but it kind of represents the same thing. But anyway, Spring Mustachio, who's also there, says, "Forged long ago on a continent that has sunk into the sea and now passed from generation to generation within the order, it's a secret sword." So considering that, I'm pretty sure the sunken continent is this same place that we saw Garo on Earth in chapter 164. Now, I don't know if this is necessarily a continent coming out of the water here, but it was a landmass, and this area of the world, I'm pretty sure, is what they're referring to. Now, Nichirin also tells Atomic Samurai to find the Gachirin wherever it sleeps. Now, Gachirin also means the Moon Blade in the fan translation, and I'm going to use that as well. And he says the Sun Blade and the Moon Blade, the one who bears both will gain unequaled strength as a sword saint. Remember that, sword saint, very important. We're going to be talking about it later. The Order's mission is to make that legend come true. So as Atomic Samurai is about to use the Sun Blade, he says Spirit Response Blade, and then he remembers this flashback of him talking to Nichirin about it. And Nichirin's like, yes, the Nichirin sword is alive. It decides if its bearer is worthy. If not, you cannot even draw it. And we come back to the present, and Atomic Samurai is about to draw it, and he says, "I could feel it probing my spirit." And then he remembers Bang, and he says, if Bang's domain is flowing water, referring to his martial arts style, then his domain is water mirror. This is kind of reminiscent of Jujutsu Kaisen, but you kind of get the idea of what's going on here. Then in this sequence, it's implied that Atomic Samurai is becoming one with the sword. And once he winds up drawing this blade, he seemingly becomes possessed by it or something, and his power ostensibly doubles, and he winds up cutting Homeless Emperor's energy spheres and all of his follow-up spheres and attacks as well, and almost winds up easily killing Homeless Emperor until he is saved by Golden S. But also in this sequence, we see that the blade itself like becomes wiggly and it's encased in light or energy or something, but it's also so sharp that it takes off Golden S's forearm. Then afterwards, Atomic Samurai sheaths the blade, but then it like implodes inside the sheath, and then Atomic Samurai comes out of like whatever fugue state he was in, and he says, "Did I become one with the sword? It took so much ki energy." So yeah, a lot of mystery around this thing, but apparently it like sends Atomic Samurai into like some kind of fugue state and drains his ki energy at the same time. But in exchange, it makes him like high dragon to possibly even Ryuijo level. So now that I have that established, that's about as much as I can really talk about going off of the manga's continuity. So at this point, I want to go into webcomic stuff, which is going to be happening happening after where the manga currently is. So if you don't want to know what's going to happen, you can check out now. Okay, so I know I've talked about all of this stuff so many times, but there's definitely a lot of you who aren't aware of this stuff, so I'm going to have to go over it again for the newcomers, but also just to reestablish this information for the sake of the video. So coming back to this landmass coming out of the water in chapter 164, this is especially fascinating because we, the audience, have only really seen this one supercontinent in the One Punch Man world where all the cities are comprised. We don't really get to see other parts of the world, and there's a reason for that. Because in chapter 119 of the webcomic, Amai Mask explains the history of the world of Saitama, and he basically says that like a long time ago there was like a lot of world wars where they fought each other for land and resources, and it caused the population to decrease until the humans began prioritizing the preservation of the future, and they unified the language, they established a world government. But even then, the aftermath of the world wars continued to erode the earth and increase in environmental toxicity, and the rapid climate change gave rise in sea level and gave birth to a large number of harmful life forms, forcing humanity to abandon much of the landmass, migrating and reestablishing themselves in the middle of the supercontinent. So yeah, we're finally starting to see what he's been talking about this whole time. Rise in sea level, meaning that this continent or this landmass here is a result of that. Now going back to that dragon monster temple thing, I talked about this in my chapter 164 review, but like I said, I'm gonna have to go over it again. This is the cruel dragon that we see on the temple. Now also, coincidentally, in chapter 119, in the cold open, Saitama like meets these random knight dudes, and they explain to him that according to legend, a colossal dragon descended upon Earth and became the embodiment of destruction. In just a few days, it took countless lives and scorched large swaths of land. As a result, its overwhelming cruelty, it became known as the Cruel Dragon. Ancient soldiers gathered together with a great many sacrifices, then managed to weaken the Cruel Dragon, and Seal Master separated the essence of the dragon using the 9 seal stones and sealed them in temples scattered across the land. The duty of watching over the Cruel Dragon seals was passed down to our branch known as Saints. Those who believe themselves to be dragonborn and are plotting to resurrect the Cruel Dragon belong to an organization known as Deathbone. So at first, I thought this was more so kind of like a tongue-in-cheek pseudo joke from One, telling us the truth about like God and the cubes that we see Blast going after, but disguising it as this. But with this development in chapter 164, maybe this is actually the truth and it's more of an analog to the God story. Because clearly we see that there are actual cubes in the manga's continuity, but they don't look like the seal stones in the webcomic. But regardless, I think that this parallels to what happened with God, because we do see that God is trapped in some way, or that he needs to be resurrected to Earth as per what the mural says on his altar beneath the Monster Association. And we also see Blast going after the cubes and collecting them, and this lines up with the duty of watching over the seals was passed down to our branch known as Saints. Now Saints, remember, that goes back to what I said Nichiren was talking about, when he was talking about the Sunblade and the Moonblade. The one who bears both will gain unequaled strength as a sword saint. Now granted, there could be multiple translations for this. This is the Viz translation, which is technically the official, but regardless, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think this is all coming full circle here. And these saints, also like the Seal Masters, whoever they were back in the day, are the same people, or affiliated with, the people that made the Sunblade and the Moonblade, meaning that they are also probably connected to Blast's group in some way, or the ancestors of it. Also, the whole thing about the sun and the moon here goes back to what I've been talking about for the last couple months in my Truth About One Punch Man series. Please check out the playlist if you haven't already. But the core of One Punch Man is the sun versus the moon. Saitama represents the sun, God represents the moon. So it's understandable that Atomic Samurai, who is a good guy, would get the Sun Blade, which means that the Moon Blade is likely the bad guy blade, meaning that a Dragonborn, or whatever the true name of them is going to be, has a moon blade. So I'm assuming that Atomic Samurai's final opponent is going to be like an evil samurai who has the moon blade. Just taking a guess here, but I think that's what's going on. And he will likely, of course, be one of God's core disciples at the end, like a part of his Akatsuki or Espada or whatever. But all of this is really cool to me, and judging off of this lore, it seems like there was like an ancient S-class or ancient heroes or something, and they did come together and successfully were able to stop God. They couldn't kill him, of course, but they sealed him at some point. And there was also these like samurai guys that were able to make this this Sunblade and somehow make it sentient. Now, we don't have nearly enough information to explain how this thing works and why it possesses and why it's alive and all of this stuff, but apparently there was just like these magically powerful dudes back in the day, and I think it connects to why there are like powerful individuals currently not related to God's influence on humanity, like with monsters and stuff like that. More so like an inherent trait of humans, but also there could be aliens involved in this too, because we see that Blast has aliens in his group of saints or whatever they're going to be called. But yeah, let me know what you think about all of this stuff in the comments, and if you liked the video, guys, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.